Welcome to the Quark and Roll podcast. I am your host, Kwok Hui Lan. Today's guest is the Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson, a church leader and activist, and the former moderator of the Metropolitan Community Church. In this episode, we'll learn from her reflections about LGBTQ issues, especially in the Trump era, and the church's response. Welcome to the podcast, Nancy.
Thank you very much. It's a delight to be here with you.
We have been 1 year into the second Trump administration, and we have seen so drastic changes, both globally and domestically. What are some of your responses for what happened during the last year?
I think the biggest concern is the clear move toward authoritarianism and for Trump's whole purpose in making the U.S. economy and world relationships serve billionaires and himself and his family economically. And all his promises, of course, about making things affordable or any promises he made to get elected, he has not fulfilled. His behavior is so beyond outrageous. It's disrupted the whole post-World War II world order that has maintained relative peace in the world, not perfect, but relative. And he is siding with authoritarian regimes around the world, clearly to create a new world order to serve him. And that is so dangerous for us. And the safeguards, such as for us, the Congress or the courts or the Supreme Court, have also been so undermined by him already that it feels like there are no barriers. And the only barrier really is the American people and our willingness to stand our ground and say no. And you do see that the result of the ways in which those barriers are making a difference and stopping some things. But the fight is on so many fronts that I know it is often overwhelming to activists. His efforts are on so many fronts, and he has no stoppage in the administration itself. So this is the perfect time for moral voices, spiritual voices that believe in a progressive vision of inclusion, of justice, and of peace to make our voices heard. And I think this is the greatest challenge. It's beyond any one issue. The biggest issue is how he has totally overthrown, really, the key institutions of American democracy. And everyone will pay a cost for this, except perhaps billionaires. And I wonder, sometimes I hope it's not too late for us as the American people to wake up to this and to stop it, because we can.
Yes, just several weeks ago, we saw that the clergy and other faith leaders, they really stood up and expressed their solidarity with the immigrant community in Minneapolis. And some of the leaders were arrested, including some of our friends.
Yes.
What do you think about the situation in Minneapolis?
It's wonderful. It's like Minneapolis now has become ground zero for resistance. And I think the fact that so many people in the coldest weather of the year and many years were willing to put their bodies, their spirits, their voices on the line. And I loved the way that there were so many diverse people of every race, LGBT rainbow flags in the protest. There was this coalition that was so powerful. It's a coalition that has governed our country before, and it's the wave of the future if we can hold on and not give up. And I think especially, I would say this for white people, not to give up and not to just make a token effort of resistance. This has to take everyone. And there were 2 white people who gave their lives, 3 actually since the beginning of the year, 1 African-American, 2 white people in Minnesota, 1 lesbian who gave her life in that. And Walter Brueggemann said that prophetic change happens with the public processing of pain. And I think what we saw was the willingness to publicly resist and speak out to the pain that families are feeling, that immigrant families are feeling, and that we are not numb to feeling their pain. We are not turning away from their pain. We are saying that we have the power to resist. And you saw that resistance begin to take effect, despite some of the rhetoric from the White House and other places. So it was just a marvelously encouraging, and I see things happening like that all over. They're happening in my state. They're happening everywhere. And we simply have to persist and never give up.
Indeed. And during the campaign, Trump has used the trans issue as a wedge issue to divide the people. And there have been also discriminatory policies against trans folks.
Yes.
What has been the reactions from the LGBT community? Did they speak up? Did they stand in solidarity with trans peoples?
I think there was a time early in our movement, maybe 20, 30 years ago, when it was controversial and when LGBT organizations, for instance, often would shy away from trans inclusion in the policy changes. But that's no longer true. I think we all understand now that we are who we are, and the tremendous diversity in the LGBT community historically and currently, and that trans people are the most vulnerable because people probably understand trans identity the least in some ways. And so the religious right, the right-wing politics exploits fear with that. And I've known trans people all my life. You have nothing to fear from trans people. We have a lot to fear from white, male, heterosexual pedophiles and billionaires. And obviously all that's being revealed against that is causing the administration to try to divert the focus on other things. But trans people are courageous personally and also often politically. And in our state, in Florida, we have a wonderful organization, Equality Florida. And all our MCT churches and many other churches and groups go to Tallahassee every year. And we go for several days of lobbying. And Equality Florida lobbies the whole 2 months that this legislature is in session against every anti-trans bill, against every anti-LGBT bill, against anti-immigrant bills, against racist bills. And we have an extraordinary amount of success in keeping most of those bills in recent years from coming to law. But the right is persistent. And right now, we are lobbying the legislature again to defeat these bills. What we find is that when LGBT organizations and political pressure is put on, it actually does matter. There are Republican legislators who don't want to pass these bills. And if they can find the ways and the reasoning and the support publicly, they will resist these bills, and they have. So we're learning that sometimes on the federal level, right now, you can't win. There's no way to exercise influence other than in elections. But in the state legislatures, even if we have a majority Republican, there is still ways locally that we can impact. We can impact school boards. We can impact local elections. And we've seen that in Florida. We've seen successes. We've seen some things that maybe we didn't even anticipate could happen because we are persistent again, and we have to fund our local organizations. We have to participate. We have to be out there on the streets. All of our MCC churches in Florida, a lot of our other more progressive churches, we're out there with our signs, get ICE out of Florida, because we see ICE in Florida a lot. And unfortunately, our state government is very welcoming to ICE.
Yes, we need to be vigilant because people of our generation would not believe that Roe v. Wade will be overturned, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we cannot just let our
Right.
guards down.
In Florida, of course, we've had our state government decide that they can paint over rainbows in streets of our cities. And we have rainbow sidewalks, some in memory of the Pulse massacre, where 41 people were massacred in a gay bar in Orlando. and they were painting rainbow sidewalks, and the state highway patrol came in and spent taxpayer money painting over those rainbow memorials in many of our cities. So many of us painted rainbow on our private sidewalks in front of our churches or where we had privately owned property, or we painted fences or things that didn't belong to the highway patrol, just to be able to resist and say, you're not going to erase us. And so it's been interesting the way different school districts or different cities or municipalities are fighting back to say, you will not stop us from expressing who we are and from affirming who we are.
Nancy, you have been a church leader for a very long time, and at one time as the moderator of the
Yes.
MCC Church. Over the decades, have you seen changes in the way that we are serving this particular community?
Yes, I always said we had 3 eras in MCC, and I'm sure we're in a 4th one now. One was we were the gay church. We were the only church really that very openly accepted gay people for a long while. And we're still that in many countries around the world. Then we became the church with AIDS, where we had to really fight for survival and fight for our people in amazing ways. And we learned so much from that about organizing and about overcoming even death and loss. And then we went into a human rights era where we began to understand that there were communities all over the world that were either MCC communities or could be aligned with MCC in some ways. There were religious, spiritual communities and the queer community. And one of the things that was great was during various periods of time, during Obama's presidency and Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, we had access to the State Department and to helping people in other countries where there was oppression and persecution. And our government said, gay rights are human rights. That was so powerful around the world. And so we saw ourselves as a human rights church, that part of our mission was to align with people in countries in Eastern Europe, in Africa, in South America and Asia, and places who were fighting for human rights, fighting for marriage equality, fighting just for the right to be able to be. And that was a tremendously exciting time of being able to do that. We're now in a kind of cold period of that being so difficult to do now, but we already have our networks. We're in a post-pandemic time. We're dealing with, as a lot of churches are, the fact that we have a very unchurched younger generation that feels disinherited by institutions in our world and suspicious of institutions, religious, secular, feels like institutions have failed. Either they were corrupted, or they simply did not stand up, or we lost a sense of how important institutions were. So it's a hard time to be maintaining and building institutions, but institutions that have core humanist values, that have moral values, that have purpose and vision, I think are the ones that are going to matter to young people. And I think we need a whole recreation of what institutions are there for, which are to help the public and civic life in our countries and to be able to serve one another, to be able to be part of making life better for all human beings. And so I think we have a long ways to go to help people embrace what it means to create healthy, purposeful, value-centered institutions. And we need people to take a chance to do that, like we did when we were young and we created MCC out of nothing. We had no money. The law was against us. Everything was against us. But we saw a purpose in creating community, eventually globally. We saw that had a purpose. It saved lives. It created the possibility for joy and peace, for people maybe to be able to live in their own countries without fear.
Yes, among the younger generations, they are the nuns and the nuns. The nuns, they do not
Right.
have religious affiliation. The nuns, they might be associated at one time, but no longer. Some of
Right.
them, if they just watch the news or the mass media, they may think that Christianity has no place for them. And so you have always been encouraging in the way of your scholarship, preaching, and work that Christianity is not inherently homophobic. Can you say a little bit more why you believe so and dedicate your life to the church?
Most of the people who came and started MCC were nuns and duns. They were people, mostly duns. The church had failed them, persecuted them. They'd been hurt by the church and left a long time ago. And then they came back because something about the faith and living a life of faith was still within them. And along the way, we've met a lot of people who had very little religious background or people who had left a long time ago. And so we're used to that population in a way. But it's a new generation of that, a new generation that has a whole different way of communicating and the whole social media and online. And I think that's a great challenge for us in MCC because we're now an older institution. We're 57 years old. And in that sense, how do we meet the new messaging, communication, and leadership challenge? For a lot of it is, how do you help people fulfill their calling in a new time when the church is not just something that's socially rewarding or acceptable in most places, where you're pioneering, where you're on the edge, where you may be taking risks with your life or certainly risks financially or in other ways, that nobody goes into MCC to make money. That doesn't happen. But we do what we do for the love of our community and people, and because we feel like we know of a God of love and justice who is beyond all this Christian nationalism. This was never our church. This was never our message. And I think there's so much I see every week at the church I pastor where people are finding the church and they're just amazed by a community they never knew existed or they never knew they could be part of, whether they're LGBTQ or straight allies or families. It's amazing.
I remember you once wrote a paper that talks about the Magi's, and then you invite us to think about the Magi may be queer. And I never thought about that. And can you share with us that story and how you read the Bible in between lines?
I did a lot of research around the concept of eunuchs, which was the concept of these leaders in the courts of the ancient Near East. And some of the eunuchs, what we found was, in biblical research confirmed it, that eunuchs were not only men, but also sometimes they said they were female eunuchs as well. And that eunuch seems to be an umbrella term for someone who does not marry or someone who serves in this particular role, like the Merlin of Britain, or different ways in which they serve the court. There are eunuchs who serve Jezebel. There are eunuchs saves the life of Jeremiah. A eunuch saves the life of Daniel. There's also these eunuchs who have these roles of intervening for the kings and queens and leaders, prophets of God. And so I came to understand that the Magi fit this picture, interestingly, they were the court magicians and astronomers, astrologers, and they had to do with magic and so much else. They were intellectuals as well. And I said how they fulfill this role because they do save the life of Jesus. At first, they endanger him by letting King Herod know where Jesus was. But then they go home by another way so that they never tell Herod where Jesus is and save his life. It's the same story. I would say, I didn't say they had their wives along for the trip, so maybe they weren't heterosexual. And then I joke and say they were the only ones to go shopping before they went to see the baby Jesus. So maybe if you think of love of shopping as especially a gay male trait, but I see them is in this sort of exotic, interesting, different way that is queer. And it certainly was a queer experience for Mary to receive them in this humble place in Bethlehem, and just what a sight that must have been. What a traffic jam that must have been for these elegant foreigners. So that's my fantasy and of interpreting the wise men who were at the manger brought LGBTQ people there.
This broadening of our imagination is very important, not
Yes.
just focusing on those passages that might be used to discriminate against
Yes.
LGBT people. You recall that at the time, we only focus on those 7 or 8 passages.
Right. Yeah.
But now we have so much
Yes.
reflections on
Right.
queer biblical hermeneutics and theology.
I think that's the lens with which Virginia Mollenkott talked about interpretive communities, and that all of our communities are interpretive communities. And so we bring our own identity, our lens. We can see things in those passages that maybe others can't see, that are clues about identity or that maybe other people can't see. And that it's joyful to do that, not to be just on the defensive, but to be on the offensive in a sense, and to say, we believe that to be LGBTQ is as good as to be any other kind of identity. And so why wouldn't we see ourselves or our culture or our identity in biblical stories? It only makes sense.
Now, sometimes people will think among the LGBT people, they are also infighting. Earlier, there might be struggles between gay and lesbians and so forth. Have you seen more understanding, more mutual learning and engagement? Because as a suppressed group, sometimes it's very difficult because each one is struggling in the space with limited resources.
I think every conflict that's among cultures gets lived out in LGBTQ people because we are Black, we are Native, we are Asian, we are Hispanic, we are white, we are female, we are non-binary, we are trans, we are male, cisgender. So all of those power conflicts, all of those issues get lived out in our politics and organizations. And there were some times that were more of a struggle than others. Some of the early gay rights movements tried to be co-gender. They didn't always succeed very well, but they tried. And then during AIDS, of course, men especially were so heavily impacted. And during those times, a lot of lesbians ended up becoming heads of organizations because the men were not able to do it. And women took care of men, women took care of organizations. But then we also had to face racism in the structure of our organizations, in how we chose leadership, how we recognized leadership, how we did or did not understand racism in our own community, and transphobia. So all of these things have been an evolving culture. And some of our organizations, some of our communities, some of our churches are better at embracing and understanding diversity than others. And we keep growing, we keep being challenged.
Can you talk about MCC's work and relationship with other MCCs? Because some of the audience may not know MCC also exists outside of United States.
Our fastest growing area of the world that MCC is growing is Brazil. And we have a lot of transgender pastors and leaders there. Very strong people, very on the edge. Brazil is an interesting culture because it used to be only Catholic, but now it's about 45% Pentecostal. And so that creates a very hostile political climate for LGBT people on the one hand. And then you have the progressive side of Brazilian politics, Lula and all others that are more progressive about the issue, but it is a constant struggle in Brazil. And so we're very out. The largest pride parade in the world is in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Millions and millions, probably 10 million people. It's huge. And in MCC, we found in Latin America, we found rich opportunities for churches all over Latin America. And that's been an exciting, we have churches in Cuba who are very challenged right now. We have churches in Europe. Europe has been a slower growing place because the church is so challenged in Europe in many ways, but we have some wonderful, strong, progressive communities. In Africa, we now have MCC churches in 9 countries, and I think we have something like 30 different groups in Africa now. And this is a surge for us there in places that are very challenging politically, where people are risking their lives to have an MCC church, whether it's underground or more above ground. We are so conscious of, and our church in Toronto works with the Rainbow Railroad in Canada to resettle refugees from all over the world who are LGBT. And they deal with hundreds of refugees who also attend the church there, who are part of that community, who are looking for safety and peace and to resettle in Canada. And the government of Canada has been very supportive, of course. Thank God for Canada. And we're so proud of our church there in Toronto for all they do.
Now, you were the former moderator, and as a church leader, what are some of the things you have learned? That is your advice for those who want to become future leaders.
I think you have to know and come to understand what is your passion and to find the spiritual strength and support within MCC, but also outside of MCC. Have colleagues and friends from many different backgrounds. That saved me many times when I thought, oh, this only happens in MCC. Many of us struggle with vocational issues and struggles. I think learning what it means to trust God for the work of justice and peace that you do, and know that it may mean you get thrust into situations you didn't think you were prepared for, and that's okay. Nobody really taught me how to talk on television or even, frankly, how to preach, because I was preaching before I had more than 3 weeks of seminary. You get thrust into situations that bring out your best or that help you refine your skills and question things, hold your institution accountable, whatever institution you serve or are part of. Don't be afraid to take risks, and also really know what your support system is. Don't get out ahead of it so much that you wear yourself out. I had a church leader in another denomination say to me, there was one Savior, it's not you. You're called to do what you're called to do, but somebody else has the bigger job. You have your part in it. That was very important to me, to be humble about maybe I can accomplish some things, but it's a part of a bigger piece. I stand on many shoulders as people stand on my shoulders.
Nancy, do you have particular spiritual practices or prayerful life that sustains you throughout the journey?
Yes, I'm a morning person mostly. I have an old-fashioned book I use called God Calling. Its language is very outdated, but I read it every day for at least 40, 45 years. It was recommended to me by a friend that long ago. I walk most mornings and I take photographs and I post them with a line from a hymn or a religious text of some kind. And I started that during the pandemic. I journal every day, which is very important. It's a journal prayer. And I read partly because I still preach too, but there are various other daily devotionals that I use or read. I'm a musician, so I sing, and I'm a bird watcher. So bird watching is a wonderful spiritual practice because it's appreciation of life and of a different life form.
I have enjoyed some of the photos you post on Facebook. And
Thank you.
Nancy, thank you so much for joining the podcast today.
Absolutely.
If you find this episode helpful to you, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next episode.
Amen.